Fred Savage was fired as executive producer and director from the reboot of The Wonder Years. Fred was fired following multiple complaints of misconduct.
Mr. Savage was aggressive towards me. He would routinely curse at me, yell at me, demean me. He hit my arm violently 3 times. I could not stop crying. I was in pain, I was humiliated, and I was scared.
Fred Savage has major issues. Like Dan Schneider, Fred tends to lose his temper on set. He has been accused of harassing coworkers from the age of 16. And as he's gotten older, he's become progressively worse. Fred Savage was actually accused of hitting a woman multiple times because she wiped off the dandruff that he had on his suit. Ultimately, he has been fired from Disney and he's not working like he used to. But his victims still want justice, so let's get into it. So Fred Savage has been in the industry for a very long time. You may recognize him as Professor Stewart from Boy Meets World, which I always wondered how he was so good at playing a creepy man who manipulates women, but it turns out, in reality, that's just who he is.
What if I said to you that I think about you? And I'd like to see you more than just on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're adults. And I'm telling you that I'd like to get to know you better. And that's what I'm gonna do.
Stuart, you're making me uncomfortable. I want you to leave.
That's not what you want.
Let's go ahead and talk about the many allegations that have been made against Fred Savage dating all the way back to 1993. It also turns out that Fred has some interesting connections to people like Dan Schneider and Disney. Speaking of Dan Schneider, once upon a time, he was an actor himself. Back in the 80s, he was a child star on the show Head of the Class. Fred Savage was also a child star at the same time, but on a different show titled The Wonder Years. It actually turns out that this show, The Wonder Years, was canceled because Fred and his co-star Jason Hervey sexually harassed the costume designer. So there's a woman named Monique Long who's a costume designer. Every production has a costume designer, a costume team, a bunch of people who work behind the scenes to keep the show going. We usually only see a couple of characters on the screen, but there are so many people back there in production who are putting it all together. Well, in a lawsuit filed in 1993, Monique claimed that she was verbally and physically harassed daily by these 2 actors. Keep in mind that they were only 16 years old at this point. So I mean, thinking back to being a 16-year-old, I can't imagine having the confidence or the entitlement to go and harass someone who's an adult who's working on this show that I'm a part of. They denied the claims and ultimately the lawsuit was dropped, but this was after Monique accepted a settlement. So she was paid off to not speak about what she went through during this show. Can you also imagine being the reason why the show was canceled? I mean, I'm sure there are other facets to why the show was canceled, but if one of the main ones is this lawsuit and these 16-year-olds who are going around and messing with things, then I mean, that's just embarrassing. So ABC canceled the show and the network paid off the costume designer to make the allegations go away and to save face.
I probably shouldn't be telling this, but I don't care because it's so long ago and it's got to be over now. And when we shot the series finale, which was in Whittier, nobody knew whether or not The Wonder Years was going to be renewed. And that's because of a completely ridiculous sexual harassment suit that was going on against Fred Savage. I wasn't allowed to talk then, which made me so upset. We had a gag order on us. And I just thought this was a joke, but it got, they bought her off, which really made me mad.
Fred was actually angry with the network for canceling the show, and he started to vocalize his feelings in 2018. He had some Yahoo Entertainment interview, and he was mad that the show was canceled over that, which I would hope at this point he would have grown up a little bit and taken some accountability, but clearly he did not. Before we go any further in this video, I do want to give a quick shout out to my friend Sarah, aka Obscure Nickelodeon. She put together this thread we're going through today, so go ahead and support her socials, all linked below. Now let's go back to Fred, because after years of being on the Wonder Years, he then moved on to another kids television show on Nick Jr., which I like, do they not do background checks? I mean, he was 16 when he was like harassing this costume designer, but I feel like that's enough to get you blacklisted from the industry. But I mean, you guys know by now that the industry does not care if you're a predator or not. They support and enable them. He also played a large role in Big Time Rush and Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, which that show is such a throwback. I forgot it existed. And as I mentioned earlier, he does have some connections to Dan Schneider. He actually directed many of Dan Schneider's shows, such as Drake and Josh, Zoe 101, and What I Like About You, which I'm like, did he like just allow the feet stuff to go on? He didn't care. He didn't stop anything. I mean, there were a lot of people behind the scenes of Dan Schneider's shows, and I always wonder why they didn't step in and do something, because they're an adult watching a child do this. They should know better. Also, speaking of Drake and Josh, I've been thinking about inviting Drake and his wife to my podcast for us to sit down and talk, because Drake loves to text me, his wife loves to text me, they love to post about me, tweet about me, Instagram about me. I think it's time we meet in person. So if anyone wants to pass that along, I mean, I was just gonna text him and his wife soon, but I'm like trying to like mentally prepare, you know what I mean? If we're gonna have a conversation, it's gonna be in person and on my podcast, which you guys are going to die when it comes out in November time. My editor's been working very hard on everything, thank you. But anyways, let's move on. You guys know Alexa Nicholas because she's a friend of the channel and she was on Zoe 101, and she also doesn't like Fred Savage. She doesn't like him as a director or frankly as a person. His eyes would go dead. They all see his absolute perfect best face, but sometimes showed a different side to the below the line employees who don't have power. So this guy was a director, he was hosting, he was pretty much running these shows and treating the people who worked behind the scenes as crap. If you're not the #1 star, then his eyes go dead and he just treats you like absolute trash. In recent years, these allegations of inappropriate behavior coming from Fred Savage began in 2018. A female crew member on the set of Fox's The Grinder in 2018 accused him of allegedly creating a hostile work environment for her. And it's not just hostile. It's not like he's over here, you know, calling his employees fat heifer, I don't know, calling them, you know, mean names. He's also getting physical with them, where when you get physical, that, you know, I draw the line. You don't get physical in the workplace. Like, that's a lawsuit right there. Allegedly, the woman said that Fred violently struck her in the arm 3 times after she brushed dandruff off his suit.
Speaking of an episode, I was attempting to brush off dandruff off Mr. Savage's jacket. Mr. Savage snapped, and he hit my arm violently 3 times. I could not stop crying. I was in pain, I was humiliated, and I was scared.
So your boy was like, you know, experiencing some dandruff, which honestly, I have my own dandruff issues. Like, I feel like everyone has like a problem, and like that's my one. Like, I have to always put oil in my hair all the time because I'll get dandruff. But anyways, I guess Fred also gets dandruff, and he had it on his suit, and this kind woman was brushing it off for him, and maybe that embarrassed him. He was like, she saw my dandruff, so then he ended up striking her. But that's supposedly who he is, and he's got a reputation of losing his cool, especially with other women on set. So it seems like maybe some of the men get away with behavior that he deems, you know, annoying, but the women, they do not. Here's a quote from Fred. "I was made aware of a woman working in the costume department of a show I was on almost 3 years ago has claimed that I treated her harshly on set simply because she was a woman." He said in a statement in 2018, "These accusations are completely without merit and absolutely untrue. Fox conducted an extensive internal investigation into her claims, a process in which I fully participated. After concluding a thorough investigation, Fox determined that there was absolutely no evidence to support these accusations. None of her claims could be substantiated because they did not happen. So a lot of these allegations came out in 2018 during the Me Too movement when, Harvey Weinstein and people like Popcorn Planet, all these allegations were coming out about these people. And even though he was denying everything, which I hate when people act brand new, like, are you serious? Can we get some accountability? It's 2022, but anyways, there's zero accountability, and ultimately he was fired. Disney let him go in May 2022, so actually a few years after these allegations came out, probably because they did an investigation and saw how bad he really was, so they let go of their director. So it's interesting to hear him talk about, like, these internal investigations that Fox did, and Fox found nothing. But then when Disney does their internal investigation, they find inappropriate behavior that's worthy of you losing your job. So major red flags right there. And these men in Hollywood need to work on their temper, like stress balls, deep breathing. I mean, marijuana is legal in this state. Why is everyone losing their temper? Like Dan Schneider, one of the writers from the Amanda Show named Jenny, claims that Dan Schneider created a gender discrimination and hostile workplace. He made people uncomfortable with his requests, and he was demanding, and he would lose his temper and go off. I mean, we've heard Jeanette McCurdy, Alexa Nicholas, so many different people talk about him and his ability to really degrade you with his words, and it seems like that's one of Dan's talents.
It certainly is. Bad parts, I mean, there's a lot of abuse that happens. I worked with an incredibly emotionally abusive producer. Even talking about it now, my face gets hot thinking of it, just because he'd say things like, you would work at Yogurtland if you didn't work for me, and he would just scream.
How old were you?
I was when I started the show, I was 13.
But at the end of the day, it seems like Fred Savage is just as bad as Dan Schneider and the rest of them, and I hope these people understand that their behavior does not go unnoticed, and one day, maybe 20 years in the future, they will be exposed for it, and I'll be here ready to make a video about it. So I want to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Here's my email, and I'll see you guys in a new video soon. Bye, guys.